Good morning, everyone. Welcome to week 6 of Taya's adventure in artistic development. Along that line, I have some observations from Hermione. How do you say that name? Hermione Lee. And she says, Taya Kronberg is a singer, not a writer. The Song of the Lark is an autobiography, but it is also a dramatization of Cather's credo. The novel's most interesting operation is the transposing it does between two keys for two different instruments, the writerly and the dramatic, the personal and the objective. There are some revealing technical remarks on this in Cather's letters to Dorothy Canfield. After publication, she told her that the whole book it was an indirect discourse, and that she had begun by having two sets of quotation marks, single and double, all the way through. The book had two manners, she said, the intimate for Taya's secret growth. Remember, she says that it lives here or in her heart. And the remote for her public profession. Many years later, when she was thinking back on the novel, she told Dorothy that most people wrote in the third person as if it were the first, that is, too intimately. Taya is Cather's second self. I thought that was really interesting. But to tell her own story, Cather had to find an objective correlative which would enable her to be remote as well as intimate. So then she goes on a bit later and she says, the peace picture of Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, which the young Taya admires in the Moonstone home of her friends the Kohlers, the musical German tailor and his wife, is an image for the way Cather pieces her own childhood together with Fremsted's. I think that's just really a good observation. Taya's parents, for instance, the fine, plain, calm, disciplined mother, and the unsympathetic Norwegian Methodist minister, happy to make money out of his daughter's piano lessons, are more Fremsted's than Cather's. Taya's painful progress from Moonstone to Chicago and her drudgery as an accompanist is the story of the singer's early years, but all the feelings are Cather's. Seems to me I may have read that before. Sometimes I can't remember if I've said it on camera or if I just recently read it. So I think that's a good way to begin because we're in the midst of Taya's development. One of the most interesting sections in the book is the Panther Canyon part. We're getting to that, but I'm just going to go straight into the novel because I don't want to lose any time. When we get to Panther Canyon, you are going to see this eureka moment that Taya has in the desert. But for now, we're going to rejoin the novel on page 217, which is where I'm pretty sure we stopped. Taya has been in Chicago and now she's returned. And there's just an interesting little interlude here where now she has become other. She's no longer immersed in the Moonstone world. So if we begin on page 217, Mrs. Kronberg had said that Taya was not to be disturbed on Sunday morning, and she slept until noon. Of course, this is remarkably different than Taya's lifestyle before she went to Chicago. And we also remember that Mrs. Kronberg is very in tune with Taya. During the silence which preceded the blessing, Taya felt something uncomfortable in the air. And now her siblings are beginning to react They say, "High society that." Remarked Charlie. And then a few lines later, "Nice, clean people, got some style about them. Do you really like that kind, Taya, or do you just pretend to?" They're making remarks about the Mexicans, and we'll find out in a minute. They're just as clean as white people, and they have a perfect right to their own ways. Of course I like them. I don't pretend things. That's a truism on two fronts. First of all, I thought it was interesting that this is still a stereotype that exists now, and I just thought it was interesting that she uh, addresses it and then says, "I don't pretend things," and she doesn't. We go to the next page. At the very top, Mr. Kronberg is hoping that Mrs. will bring some peace. Second paragraph, "No use spoiling your Sunday dinner with race prejudices. The Mexicans suit me and Teo very well. They are a useful people." Again, I just thought it was interesting that that stereotype still persists. And then down at the bottom of page 218, the second last paragraph, "Of course, it reflects on your father when you scarcely polite to the nice people here and make up to the rowdies." So, um, they're kind of taking her down, um, and remarking that she's different and how always has been. At the top of 219, "Well, I like to sing over there, and I don't like over here. I'll sing for them any time they ask me to. They know something about what I'm doing. They're a talented people." Um, Tia is talking about her adventure with um, joining the Mexican ball. And of course, you can see what the problem is. Um, Taya doesn't. She likes the Mexicans because of the music. And the family, we've seen this 5 times, is very conscious of the local talk. And so they're they're taking her to task about having been over there with the Mexicans. Anna says, "Talented." Anna made the word sound like escaping steam. "I suppose you think it's smart to come home and throw that at your family." Anna is the older sister. Remember, she's second in charge, and she is a harsh girl. And I can't remember if we've seen this yet or not, but she has um, taken the religion and has, oh yeah, I think we've seen this. So therefore she sees herself as somehow apart and above the rest of the Kronberg flock. Next paragraph, "I'll have to throw it at them sooner or later. It's just a question of when, and it might as well be now as any time." This is a talk about um, talent. Of course, she's defensive about it. And if we look down um, in this larger paragraph at the bottom of 219, "But there was a hostility in the house now which this door could not shut out. This would be her last summer in that room. Its services were over. Its time was done. She sees that she is outside of the family. She has grown beyond them." A few lines later, "She was not ready to leave her little shell. She was being pulled out too soon." It's really um, Heather's foreshadowing of the maturity, the artistic maturity, and also her maturity as a young woman that is beginning to come out. If we look on the next page at the top of the room, not at the top of the room, at the top of the page, um, top of it's the first paragraph. "Yes, she and it must fight it out together." There's the it. The thing that looked at her out of her own eyes was the only friend she could count on. And this harkens back to what I read from the Lee book. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it without I got a little cheat sheet here that tells me how to pronounce it. Anyway, Hermione Lee said that Cather and Taya are complementary selves. Last line of this paragraph, "She had no little vanities, only one big one, and she would never forgive." Next paragraph, "Taya felt that she had been betrayed." And then a few lines later, "But she had never been disloyal, never felt scorn or held grudges. So she is alienated from her family, and they have gone back to they have remained in their own ways, and Taya has grown beyond that. At the bottom of this page, 220, they faced each other as individuals, and she saw that Anna and Gus and Charlie were among the people whom she had always recognized as her natural enemies. Um, and by natural enemies, I think what Cather wants us to understand is that those people, those are her siblings, um, know that she has always been different, but they didn't know why. And Taya's beginning to understand why. At the top of 221, their ambitions and sacred proprieties were meaningless to her. End of that paragraph. No, it was all clear enough. Nothing that she would ever do in the world would seem important to them, and nothing they would ever do would seem important to her. So, again, she's seeing that she is outside and other, and it's because of the artist in her. At the bottom of page 221, come look at this picture of Pauline Hall in tights, Taya. So Pauline Hall was an American actress, dancer, singer, and popular pinup girl who organized her own company in 1892 and toured widely across the country. Then there's at the end of this paragraph a reference to Clara Morris or Majeska. Clara Morris, also an American, was a profoundly popular actress with limited gifts and an overwrought melodramatic style. Helena Majeska was in an altogether different category. Born in Poland, she made her reputation in Europe as a Shakespearean actress and immigrated to the United States in 1876. Here she introduced Ibsen to the American stage, and despite faulty English, consolidated her reputation as one of the great tragic actresses of all time. Cather had lunch with Majeska in 1898 and portrays the actress in her novel My Mortal Enemy, just so you know who those characters are. If we turn the page to 222, Tilly, remember Tilly is Taya's aunt, and she's always kind of lurking over here and flitting about. But Tilly says, "Don't you go and be upset about any of Anna's notions. She's one of these narrow kind." How interesting that Tilly makes that observation. But we have seen her act as a truth speaker in previous chapters. She's kind of a ditz, but seems to be able to speak the truth. Next two paragraphs at the end, she felt differently towards the house and everything in it, as if the battered old furniture that seemed so kindly and the old carpets on which she had played had been nourishing a secret grudge against her and were not to be trusted anymore. Just emphasizing this concept that she has become other. Towards the bottom of 222, Taya's body was often curiously expressive of what was going on in her mind, and tonight there was something in her walk and carriage that made these boys feel that she was stuck up. Um, a lot of times, people who are outside the norm are defined as stuck up. But again, I thought it was really insightful of Cather to use that term. That's something that my kids have said that, "Ooh, she's so stuck up." And we know exactly what that means. If we look at the top of 223, um, let's see, let's see, Taya said, she's talking to Dr. Archie about a third of the way down, but it's silly to live at all for little things, she added quietly. Living's too much trouble unless one can get something big out of it. Foreshadowing, of course, her ambition. At the bottom of 223, Dr. Archie watched her contemplatively, as if she were a beaker full of chemicals working. A really interesting image because she has not formed yet, but things are mixing up in her. At the top, on the next page, 224. Dr. Archie, of course, has always been a good advisor for her. He says, at the top, Taya, he said slowly, I won't say that you can have everything you want. That means having nothing in reality. But if you decide what it is you want most, you can get it. His eye caught hers for a moment. Not everyone can, but you can. Only if you want a big thing. You've got to have nerve enough to cut out all that's easy. Everything that's had to be had cheap. And then these lines in the middle of the page, I have a note on this. This is from the second stanza of a poem called My Dear and Only Love by James Graham, Marquis of Montrose. And he lived between 1612 and 50. And it's just a little truism from Dr. Archie. He either fears his fate too much or his deserts are small. Who dares not put it to the touch to win or lose it all? It's either an all or nothing for her. Um, Two paragraphs. I mean to get rich, if you call that doing anything. I've found what I can do without. You make such bargains in your mind first. And then a few lines later, toward very bottom of this page. Oh, it's easy to fail. And it is. We're going to see that maybe she's not always going to be as successful as she wants to be. Um, Dr. Archie at the top of page 225 knows about the it. He sees it. Um, Her pale cheeks, her parted lips, her flashing eyes seemed suddenly to mean one thing. He did not know what. A light seemed to break upon her from far away, perhaps from far within. See, he sees it. She seemed to grow taller, like a scarf drawn out long, looked as if she were pursued and fleeing, and, yes, she looked tormented. It's easy to fail, he heard her say again, and if I fail, you'd better forget about me, for I'll be one of the worst women that ever lived. I'll be an awful woman. Uh, Next paragraph. Wild as her eyes were, that yellow gleam at the back of them was as hard as a diamond drill point. Remember, Ray saw the gleam in her eye as well. Next, down towards the bottom of 225. So it went. One loved a quaint little girl, cheerful, industrious, always on the run and hustling through her tasks, and suddenly one lost her. This is Dr. Archie's view of her. He had thought he knew that child like the glove on his hand, but about this tall girl who threw up her head and glittered like that all over, he knew nothing. She was goaded by desires, ambitions, revulsions that were dark to him. One thing he knew, that old high road of life, worn safe and worn, hugging the sunny slopes, would scarcely hold her again. And we can hear Cather giving us a bit of insight into Taya and into her future at the top of page 226. After the little break in the page, um, that Sunday in July was the turning point. Taya's peace of mind did not come back. And at the end of this same paragraph, it's a really nice image. She began to feel the same restlessness that had tortured her the last spring when she was teaching in Moonstone. Suppose she never got away again after all. Suppose one broke a leg and had to lie in bed at home for weeks, or had pneumonia and died there. The desert was so big and thirsty, if one's foot slipped, it could drink one up like a drop of water. I just thought that was a really beautiful image. And then the last line of this chapter on 227, how much older she was now and how much harder. She was going away to fight, and she was going away forever. So we move into the next section entitled Stupid Faces. Taya divides the world into those people who are stupid and those who are not. And for the most part, she sees everybody else as stupid. But she knows she is not, neither are her friends, Dr. Archie, Ray, and Spanish Johnny, and the Kohlers. Somehow they share this insight. If you look over at the top of page 232, Um, he went to concerts chiefly to satisfy himself as to how badly things were done and how gullible the public was. This is her teacher, Mr. Bowers, Madison Bowers. He is a grumpy guy. Um, let's see, he hated the whole race of artists, the work they did, the wages they got, and the way they spent their money. At the end of this paragraph, his cold nature and academic methods were against him. His audiences were always aware of the contempt he felt for them. A dozen poor singers succeeded, but Bowers did not. So, Bowers is an interesting character because he's supposed to be the best voice teacher in Chicago, and yet he doesn't have much artistry. Next paragraph. Bowers had all the qualities which go to make a good teacher, except generosity and warmth. And then at the end of this paragraph, he was not at all above helping a very lame singer across if her husband's checkbook warranted it. He had a whole bag of tricks for stupid people. So the non-artistic types are what he also defines as stupid. He calls them life preservers. At the top of 233, but the husbands never found the repairs very cheap. And a few lines later, he was intensely avaricious, and from these semi-professionals, he reaped a golden harvest. He is a money-grubbing guy. End of this paragraph. For the first time, Taya had a friend who, in his own cool and guarded way, liked her for whatever was least admirable in himself. And we're going to see her being taught by him. And what we wonder, what is she going to gain? Because as she goes along, she gains little bits from everybody that she encounters. At the top of 234, I can't work with a lot of girls around. This is Taya. They're too familiar. I never could get along with girls of my own age. It's all too chummy. Gets on my nerves. I didn't come here to play kindergarten games. Um, so it's perhaps a bit of what she gets from Bowers is um, the distancing, the same kind of distancing that she did when she was home. Next paragraph, he flattered himself that he had made her harsher than she was when she first came to him, that he had got off a little bit of the sugar coating. Harsanyi always put on the sugar coating Harsanyi always put on his pupils. She's going to need that. She's going to need that distancing. The art of making yourself agreeable never comes amiss, Miss Kronberg. I should say you rather need a little practice along that line. And then we enter Mrs. Priest, who's one of these people who's got a husband with a big checkbook. Note it's always the husband with the big checkbook. It's the sign of the times. I just underlined this sentence. I think this is funny. At the descriptions of her are really beautiful, really interesting. But the funny thing is the last sentence of this paragraph. She gave the impression of wearing a cargo of splendid merchandise. Um, so she's come to Bowers for lessons, and it seems that she's not that great. Perhaps she's in that line of stupid voices. Um, She asks, and Taya is the accompanist, and Mrs. Priest wants her to play "Rejoice Greatly," which is from the Messiah. Somewhere in here, the Taya says something about not being able to play Handel's Messiah one more time. At the top of page 236. When she first heard Mrs. Priest sing in church, Taya admired her. Since she had found out how dull the good-natured soprano really was, she felt a deep contempt for her. She felt that Mrs. Priest ought to be reproved and even punished for her shortcomings, that she ought to be exposed, at least to herself, and not to be permitted to live and shine in happy ignorance of what a poor thing it was she brought across so radiantly. So interesting. Taya in her maturation, she's beginning to uh, be able to appraise others in her pursuit of being better than they are. At the bottom of page, no, at the bottom of this paragraph, how handsome your afternoon girl would be if she did not have that unfortunate squint. It gives her that vacant Swede look. So my note on that is that Swedish immigrants were frequently subjected to slurs about their intelligence. Dumb Swede. It seems like immigrants are always considered dumb. And if we look over on page 237, in the middle of that paragraph that's at the top, with that increased independence of body, there had come a change in her face, an indifference, something hard and skeptical. So this is an observance of Taya. She's becoming hard, and we saw the process. She started out distancing herself from her own family, from her little, even a room in the attic, and now she's assessing other artists, would-be other artists. If we look over on page 238, Mrs. Harsanyi, it seems to me that what I learn is just to dislike. I dislike so much and so hard that it tires me out. I've got no heart for anything. Um, and again, it's an ingredient that goes towards creating the essentially the great artist that she wants to become. At the top of page 239, Taya shook her head. That's just what I don't understand myself. Only after I've heard them all afternoon, I come out frozen up. Somehow it takes the shine off of everything. As an accompanist, she is discouraged, and it's not doing her any good. Even though she has associated herself with supposedly the best voice teacher in Chicago, it's not helping her. And Mrs. Harsanyi says, you must not begin to fret about the successes of cheap people. Bit of insight from her. Towards the bottom of 239, but now I keep wanting to tell them how stupid they are. Seems like they ought to be informed, don't you think? She always was assessing everybody else. Please tell Mr. Harsanyi that I think oratorio is a great chance for bluffers. This is from Hayden, based on Milton's poem from Paradise Lost. And just because you sing a beautiful piece of music does not mean that you are a great singer. She knows that. At the top of page 240, well, there's nothing he loves like a good faker. Nothing he hates like a good artist. Bowers hates a good artist because he's not. And so he's resentful. I always remember something Mr. Harsanyi said about him. He said Bowers was the cold muffin that had been left on the plate. Cold, old, and stale. On page 241, at the top of the page, the last sentence of the incomplete paragraph, they could see no reason for keeping up with a girl who, under her jocularity, was cold, self-centered, and unimpressionable. In the next paragraph, Taya used to waken up in the night and wonder why she was so unhappy. She would have been amazed if she had known how much the people whom she had met in Bauer's studio had to do with her low spirits. She had never been conscious of those instinctive standards which are called ideals, and she did not know that she was suffering for them. So she's being dominated, perhaps, by her job as an accompanist. It caused her bitter unhappiness. And then at the top of page 242, Chicago was not so very different from Moonstone after all, and Jessie Darcy was only Lily Fisher under another name. Remember Lily Fisher? She was that Taya's competition in Moonstone, and Jessie Darcy is a singer who's kind of made it big, and Taya knows that she's just a faker. So, um, let's see, the at the top of page 243, also about a third of the way down. This morning in Gonad's Ave Maria, as Miss Darcy approached her Be Natural. Um, so, what have I got here? I have a note here. I think this is another piece from Ave Maria. I can't find this reference. Oh, there it is. In a phrase from the 1853 work by composer Charles Francois Gounod, the syllable LAR is written as a high A, and Miss Darcy can only get to the B. We go to the next page, 244. And this is pretty much the center of the page. Taken by surprise, Taya put down the score she was reading and answered before she knew what she was saying. I hate her for the sake of what I used to think a singer might be. So we have a comparison here between the ideal and reality in an artist. What is the ideal? Well, Miss Darcy isn't it. She thinks she is, and Miss Darcy doesn't even know why she's popular, but she is. Down at the bottom of this page, she went over to the waterside of Michigan Avenue and walked along beside the lake. It was a clear, frosty winter night. The great empty space over the water was restful and spoken of freedom. I thought that was really interesting because I think she's walked here before. The water side of Michigan Avenue. Well, right now there's a whole lot of tall buildings there. But at the time, there must not have been. I just think these references to Chicago are really interesting. At the top of 245, she believed that what she felt was despair, but it was only one of the forms of hope. And what we saw on the previous page is this conundrum between reality and the ideal. And we've got the same thing here. It was despair, which becomes hope. She felt indeed as if she were bidding the stars goodbye, but she was merely renewing a promise. Though their challenge is universal and eternal, the stars get no answer but that. The brief light flashed back to them from the eyes of the young, who unaccountably aspire. So the dichotomy between hope and despair. And if we look towards the bottom of this page, that, by the way, is something that I starred. That's a big one. Next paragraph. Money and office and success are the consolations of impotence. Fortune takes kind to such solid people and lets them suck their bone in peace. She flicks her whip upon flesh that is more alive, upon that stream of hungry boys and girls who tramp the streets of every city, recognizable by their pride and discontent, who are the future, who possess the treasure of creative power. The young come to Chicago to succeed. But not all are going to make it because not all of them have the wherewithal that Taya does. Next chapter, second sentence, she went out from it to uncertainties and hastened to it. Oh, she's talking about Bauer's studio. It's the only constant she has. And hastened to it from nebulous confusion. She was more influenced by Bowers than she knew. Unconsciously, and here's the nugget that she gains. Unconsciously, she began to take on something of his dry contempt and to share his grudge without understanding exactly what it was about. His cynicism seemed to her to be honest. Are we going to see her become cynical? Perhaps. She admired his drastic treatment of his dull pupils. The stupid deserved all they got, and more. Bowers knew that she thought him a very clever man. Oh, we'll see about that. So here comes Mr. Philip Frederick Ottenberg, this young man, whom is from a St. Louis beer mogul. And I looked it up. Budweiser was started in 1876. So I don't know if this is patterned after Anheuser-Busch, after the Bush family. I didn't say anything like that, but um, Ottenberg is an interesting guy, and he appears quite a bit through some of the next chapter. Anyway, I just thought you'd think that was interesting. I don't know if it was, um, but there were a lot of big breweries in St. Louis at the time. So he comes in and he's very stylish and he's a tall, robust young man with a cane and an English hat and an ulster. I wasn't absolutely sure what an ulster was, so I looked it up. Of course, it says Ulster, Ireland, but that's not what we're talking about. It's a coat. It's an overcoat. Some of them, some of the ulsters, had the cape that went over the shoulder. I'm sure you've seen Sherlock Holmes wearing that kind of thing. So here's Ottenberg, and he's easily familiar. There's artless presumption in him, and at the end of the big paragraph on 247, he had a way of floating people out of dull or awkward situations, out of their own torpor or constraint or discouragement. That's his purpose here. It was a marked personal talent of almost incalculable value in the representative of a great business founded on social amenities. So he's not a great businessman, he's just really good at social interaction. Bottom of the page. He usually made his assumption of a special understanding seemed a tribute to the other person and not to himself. It's between kind of thing. Not sure what that's all about. Um, One second. There's always something. I attempted this morning to put them all in their crates. I have a dog area in the basement, and they weren't having it. They just sat down there and barked because they knew I was up here. Anyway, just keep going. At the bottom of this page, so we're getting to know Ottenberg, and of course, he's going to play an interesting role as well. At the bottom of page 248, she not infrequently refused to do what she was asked to do, but it was not like her to explain her refusal, even when she had a good reason. I started this because there is something appealing to her in Ottenberg. Oh, we know where that's going. He may, let's see, at the bottom of page 249. He could not see their faces, but there was something about his girl's back that he had not noticed before. He's going to make a lot of references to how he's able to read her from her back. It's just kind of instead of in her face, he sees it in the posture of her back. But there was something about his girl's back that he had not noticed before, a very slight and yet very free motion from toes up. Her whole back seemed plastic, seemed to be molding itself to the galloping rhythm of the song. He is able to see her immersion in the song. And it isn't unless she's immersed in it that the song comes to life. If we look over in the next chapter, that was just something that was interesting. On the next page, 250, after Ottenberg was gone, Taya noticed that Bowers was more agreeable than usual. She had heard the young brewer ask Bowers to dine with him at his club that evening, and she saw that he looked forward to dinner with pleasure. Bowers likes Ottenberg, but what I think is interesting here is that Ottenberg is able to bring out from people, as the narrator told us, something social. We even see it in Bowers, who's not that social. If we look over on page 241, I circled this a reference to Worth gowns. We saw that in the Age of Innocence. The Worth gowns, they were these fabulous. I think I didn't look it up this time, but I think I had a note to myself that some of the gowns cost $10,000. I mean, That's an astonishing amount of money for a dress at the time. Um, next pair, let's see. She's back. Taya's back in her house. She lives in a boarding house. In a few moments, I'm in a third of the way down on 252. In a few moments, some of the pension office girls would come in and begin to two-step. Taya wished that Ottenberg would come and let her escape. Those are just, those are the girls that Taya was referring to. They're just girls, and she remember her friends were always men because they would talk to her and the Kohlers. So she was not interested in these girls. And the two-step is a is often part of folk dances. So they're all going to come in and they're going to do their little dancing, and this is the kind of thing that Taya just is not interested in. Next page on 253. She, Mrs. Henry Nathan Meyer, you must put yourself in her hands. Whatever she says about music, about clothes, about life will be correct. He has uh, created a connection for Taya where she can sing, um, and perhaps come out of Bauer's clutches. If you were to sing like Jessie Darcey, she would not be surprised, but she would manage not to hear you again. So he is telling her to sing with heart, as if she's immersed in the music. And so he's going to make this connection for her at the top of 254. Um, I'm not interested in singers. His tone was offended. I am interested in talent. There are only two interesting things in the world anyhow, and talent is one of them. He sees that in her. Next paragraph. Fred saw her face and broke into a laugh. Why, you're guying me, you little wretch. I had to look that up too. Guying me, it means you're making fun of me, and she is. But they somehow have a rapport here that we think might be like some of the friendships she's had in the past. Maybe. There's a reference in the next paragraph to the Nietzsche Club. I know I have something about that, the Nietzsche Club. Um, well, I have a note around here somewhere. The Nietzsche Club is, oh no, there's the word that counts. Nietzsche Club. Here we are. Friedrich Nietzsche is a German philosopher, early proponent of Wagner's music, and vehement critic of bourgeois tastes and values. Nietzsche advocated a heroic mortality, i.e., choosing to live at the highest level of passion and creativity rather than following the herd mentality of the crowd. Interesting point here. Mrs. Nathan Meyer was a heavy, a powerful old Jewess with a great pompadour of white hair, a swarthy complexion, an eagle nose, and sharp, glittering eyes. And she has a husband who is elderly and gentle and kind. Um, Down towards the bottom of page 255, Taya felt at home standing there beside him. She felt that he was very wise and that he some way took one's life up and looked it over kindly as if it were a story. I just thought that was a beautiful passage. Uh, Looking at something like this and turning it over kindly. They have two Steinway pianos. Uh, So I looked that up too. I know what a Steinway piano is, but um, it was the finest pianos, and they were created by a German American piano company, which was started in 1853. I just fun fact to know and tell. If we look at the end of very bottom of this page, Mrs. Nathan Meyer rang for her own maid. Selma will take you upstairs, Miss Kronberg, and you will find some dresses on the bed. Try several of them and take the one you like best. Oh, I thought that the syntax here was interesting. Selma will take you upstairs, and you will find some dresses on the bed. uh, Cather does try to mimic people's accents. We saw that in her interaction with the Mexicans, and here we see it a little bit with Mrs. Nathanmeyer. Um, uh, so they make the observation that I think so. I liked her when she talked to father. She will always get on better with men. It's interesting that Mrs. Nathanmeyer can observe that. Here's her view of Taya, Mrs. Nathanmeyer's. About her beauty, she has great possibilities, but you can never tell about those northern women. They look so strong, but they are easily battered. The face falls so early under those wide cheekbones. A single idea, hate or greed or even love, can tear them to shreds. She is 19. Well, in 10 years, she may have quite a regal beauty, or she may have a heavy, discontented face all dug out in channels. I think her observations are pretty close to what could happen to Taya. Um, Next paragraph, or a couple of paragraphs. With that hard glint in her eye, the people won't matter much, I fancy. They will come and go. She's very much interested in herself, as she should be. So Mrs. Nathanmeyer lifts her lorgnette and studied her as she, you know what a lorgnette is? It's the glasses with the handle that comes down here. She holds that up. She approached the characteristic things at once: the free, strong walk, the calm carriage of the head, the milky whiteness of the girl's arms and shoulders. Sometimes Cather introduces characters in order to give us their perspective of it. So we're getting all these different facets of Taya. At the bottom of page 257 is a story about Oli. I have friends whose heritage is Scandinavian, and they tell Oli jokes. It's the funniest thing. But anyway, here's an Oli story. They're all stereotypes, of course. Taya sat down in Norway, and this is a story that she was told. In Norway, my grandmother knew a girl who was awfully in love with a young fellow. For those of you who have progressed further in the novel, this little piece here is interesting. She went into service on a big dairy farm to make enough money for her outfit. And it goes on. That very summer, the day before St. John's Day, which is June 24th, her husband caught her carrying on with another farmhand. And then if we look at the top of page 258, this is not going to be to the young girl's benefit. But everybody got very drunk on June 24th, and Oli went right on singing, and he danced her over the edge of the cliff, and they fell hundreds of feet and were all smashed to pieces. And I wrote in the margin, yikes. Why, why does Taya tell us this story? Why does Cather have Taya tell us this story? We're not sure yet. We'll see. At the end of, this is about 2/3 of the way down, the doorway made a frame for him. Oh, this is a kind of a beautiful little picture. Mr. Nathanmeyer apparently left the room, but then heard Taya singing, and he came back in, and he looked like a man in a picture with the long, shadowy room behind him. Just an interesting picture of him. Perhaps you always wonder why people are standing in doorways or looking out windows. Perhaps he is a representation of a doorway opening for her. So at the top of page 259, Mrs. says, "That's the first real voice I've heard in Chicago. I don't count that stupid priest woman." So there's one of the stupid people, which is the name, of course, of the chapter. And they call her a svensk summer, which means Swedish summer. And towards the end, at the bottom of page 259, oh, and Ottenberg was jolly. He made you want to come back at him. You weren't being caught up and mystified. You were startled in with him. You went. You cut the breeze, as Ray used to say. He had some go in him. So she's a little bit interested. And then we get the background into Ottenberg and his family. Um, and the connection to the business, which he does best at being social. Let's see what 260 at the bottom of page 260. Fred had never been bored for a whole day in his life. When he was in Chicago or St. Louis, he went to ball games, prize fights, and horse races. Um, I lived in St. Louis for 12 years or something, and two of my daughters are there. That's in fact what still goes on there. I don't know about the prize fights, but certainly the ball games. They're as nutty about their baseball Cardinals as we are about the Packers. End of this chapter, he had so many natural interests that he had no affectations. Physical energy was the thing he was full to the brim of, and music was one of its natural forms of expression. He had a healthy love of sport and art, of eating and drinking. When he was in Germany, he scarcely knew where the soup ended and the symphony began. I had to contemplate that. But for him, everything is a continuum. Meals go into balls go into it's just one thing after another. He's as if he's in constant motion. Um, she's in. Let's see. We get a description of her room at the boarding house, but she likes the room because not only can she get the piano into it, I'm not sure how that happened, but there were two windows, one on the south and one on the west. Remember that one of the appeals for her in her attic was the window so that she could look out. Um, she felt less walled in than she had in other houses. She went from boarding house to boarding house, unhappy in most of them. Page 262. Um, she hated the poisoned feeling in her throat, and no matter how often she gargled, she felt unclean and disgusting. Still, if she had been ill, she was almost glad that she had a contagious illness. Um, I think I just marked this because that seems to be what COVID is doing to people. Um, otherwise she would have been at the mercy of the people in the house. So she just is not very social. She knew that they disliked her, yet now that she was ill, they took it upon themselves to tap her door, send her messages, books, even a miserable flower or two. Taya knew that their sympathy was an expression of self-righteousness, and she hated them for it. She seems to have a lot of contempt for a lot of people, but those are all those pension house girls. They're just factory workers. So in walks um, Mary, the Hun, I mean, she's Hungarian, um, and she's carrying a long box in a big basket. And next paragraph towards the bottom, she lays still all afternoon with drowsy eyes, watch the roses open. Wow, just think that's a beautiful picture. Bottom of page 263. Fred knew where all the pleasant things in the world were, she reflected, and knew the road to them. He had keys to all the nice places in his pocket, and seemed to jingle them from time to time. And then he was young, and her friends had always been old. Her mind went back over them. They had all been teachers. That's an interesting observation. Wonderfully kind, but still teachers. Ray Kennedy, she knew, had wanted to marry her. That's the first she ever recognized that. But he was the most protecting and teacher like of them all. So she thinks to herself, this is eye boggling, mind boggling, eye popping. I want him for a sweetheart. She's kind of taken with him. Of course, that continues. Um, in the next book, towards the bottom of page 264, she shook her head. No, it won't be comfortable there till I've got something to show for myself. I'm not going on at all, you know. This year has been mostly wasted. And he says, you're stale. Um, she knows that the drudgery of Bauer's studio is what's oppressing her, and Ottenberg knows. And at the right in the middle of page 265, I go a long way from here, west, I think. I'd go. Maybe I could get some of my spring back in this cold, cloudy weather. No idea. She looked out on the lake and shivered. I don't know. It does things to me. So, those of us who are living in Wisconsin, um, I look out into my yard and I see remaining a foot of snow. And she's oppressed by that. I think maybe we all are. Um, so, they talk about this place called Panther Canyon. He has a big worthless ranch down in Arizona. This is owned by his family. They call it Panther Canyon, chock full of that sort of thing. I often go down there to hunt, and it's managed by a German couple, the Biltmers. And Fred thinks she needs some respite, and he arranges to send her to the ranch. I'll get you transportation. It would make a new girl of you. Um, and then 266. Ottenberg laughed. If that's all, I'll show you how to begin. You won't get this feeling that you won't get this for nothing quite. I'll ask you to let me stop off and see you on my way to California. And then a few lines later, well, I don't exactly see why you take the trouble. What do you get out of it? You haven't liked me so well the last 2 or 3 weeks. What do we think he's going to get from it? One of the things is that he's very generous and that he sees in her the oppression of her current situation. Um, and he says, you need a tonic. And at the bottom of page 266, of course, I'd like you so well when you're half anesthetized all the time. And oh, I don't like you so well. Um, he's trying to bring her out. And now we begin to see how it is that Cather manages to get Taya to Arizona, Panther Canyon. And what Cather is merging here is Cather's own experience of having gone to Arizona to visit her brother. This seems to have been a eureka for Cather as well. And Taya Rose, she says, I don't know, being bored eats the heart out of me. Remember, 2 pages earlier, we see that Fred has never been bored a day in his life, and she is bored and it's oppressing her. Fred noticed for the 100th time how vehemently her body proclaimed her state of feeling. We're going to see him make those observations 50 times. And now she seemed a moving figure of discouragement. The very waiters glanced at her apprehensively. It was not that she made a fuss, but her back was most extraordinarily vocal. And then the last line of this page. As he put her into the cab, Fred reflected once more that he gave her up. He would attack her when his lance was brighter. Mm-hmm. So now, in this interesting chapter about here. So first of all, Panther Canyon is an Arizona ranch of the Ottenbergs. Seems as though it was close to Winslow. Um, the Ottenbergs are a wealthy family of brewers to which Fred Ottenberg sends Taya to recuperate when she realizes that overwork has put her on the verge of a breakdown. There, she is revitalized by a summer in the hot sun and dry air. Based on Walnut Canyon in north central Arizona, Panther Canyon is the site of Native American cliff dwellings that become an important inspiration to Taya's continued maturation as an artist. This is where it's going to happen. Um, Among houses carved out of the cliffs, Taya realizes that the true nature of art she realizes the true nature of art and renews her commitment to live the life of an artist. However, it is also here that she falls openly in love with the married Fred, and starts an affair that complicates her artistic life. And I hope I'm not giving that away, um, but that's coming up in a couple of pages. So then a little bit more of a, everybody's all excited. I get all these critics are very excited about this Panther Canyon chapter. Uh, Cather requires Taya to pretend to be a Native American from the past as a new place from which she can look back with new perspective on herself and what she has learned, particularly in her training as a singer. However, this inventive act does not occur on a purely clean slate. Remembering her former mentor and would be husband Ray Kennedy, we understand how Taya has been primed for this encounter with Panther Canyon. Not only does Ray plant the idea of cliff dwellers suffering, he also tells her that the cliff dwellings should inspire her to do her best on account of those fellows having had it so hard. So this was not an easy life. We know this out in the desert. He tells her that the Indian women were their community's artists, readying Taya for her epiphany in the waters of the canyon about art and her future singing plans. The railroad man, whose life involved close association with the desert, influences Taya's ability to discover her own identity in a cleft in the earth in Arizona. And that's exactly what this is. It's a canyon. The singing skill Taya develops during her time in Chicago lacked inspiration, which is why she was so oppressed. But the quiet hours of repose in Panther Canyon cultivate Taya's artistic imagination. As if she has been waiting for something to catch up with her. She fills her leisure with pleasant and incomplete conceptions in her mind, not ideas, but fragrances, colors, and sounds. Um, it's interesting how Cather describes this Panther Canyon because it isn't just visual. Um, as human beings, we're very, very visual, but as you are reading these descriptions, notice that the other senses that Cather includes. Taya becomes a mere receptacle for heat, a color, or a repetition of sound. Those hours prepare her to find artistic inspiration one of the times she bathes in the stream. The water where Taya washes daily had been the source of nourishment to the ancient dwellers of the canyon. It has a personality, and that's a quote. She calls it a personality, and was a continuity of life, also in quotes. She connects how important the water is to the Native American Indians who had lived in the cliffs when she realizes that those women had decorated the vessels to carry water as if to honor its essential nature in those people's lives. The interesting thing is when remember when she was little, she used to pick up little bits of rocks that she liked, and in this case, she's sifting through some of the cliff homes and finds broken pieces of pottery, some of which are beautifully decorated. Considering the arid quality of the southwestern desert and the arduous climb from the cliff dwellings to the stream, water, widely accepted as the most important nutrient for human existence, is a rare and precious commodity for the Indians. This realization gives Taya the inspirational understanding for what it means to be an artist. She asks herself, what was any art but an effort to make a sheath, a mold in which to imprison for a moment the shining, elusive element which is life itself too sweet to lose. Do you remember the first time that Taya went to a concert and she left the concert and was walking down the streets of Chicago, and she was getting kind of jostled by people who were hurrying to get out of the new winter storm, and she kept trying to cling to the inspiration that she got from that concert. And that's the same kind of inspiration that she gathers from these vessels. The canyon experience combined with Taya's inspiration in the bathing pool give her both the theory and the method that will make her interpretation of her operatic role something recognized as artistic genius. Um, so these are the pieces that are coming together in this chapter. Um, one more paragraph. These, and as I said, critics are super excited about this chapter because we walk with Cather slash Taya in their artistic awakening. The southwestern landscape abundant in empty ruins and expansive spaces make an ideal location for inspiration, a site where Taya gains a new perspective of herself and develops a new philosophy of artistry through her experiences in Panther Canyon. When she turns these ideas back on herself, Taya sees that she can choose her destiny by focusing on a professional singing career. In the process of working out her ideas in the creatively inspiring space of the canyon, Taya learns a method that enhances her career. By the time we last read about Taya performing on the stage, we come to understand, this is important, that her body had become an instrument of her ideas, which is why it is so interesting that Fred sees this in her back. It is the only way possible because of her desert Southwest experience. And I think that Cather saw that in herself, that her awakening came when she visited her brother. And at least that is the pieces that we're seeing. Um, okay, so if we go to page 271, come back. Um, so about its base lie the pine forests of the Navajos, where the great red-trunked trees lived out their peaceful centuries in that sparkling air. The pinyons, which is they're like pine nuts. They aren't pine nuts, but they're little kind of nutty things that come from these pine trees. The pinyons and scrub begin only where the forest ends, where the country breaks into open, stony clearings and the surface of the earth cracks into deep canyons. The great pines stand at a considerable distance from each other. Each tree grows alone. It's pretty emblematic of Taya. The Navajos are not much in the habit of giving or asking for help. Over their forest, there is some inexorable reserve. Each tree has its exalted power to bear. Um, and Taya's going to go it alone. We think that's what's going to happen because she is like one of those great trees. So Henry Biltmer has fetched her from the train station in a Democrat wagon. I looked that up. It's a flatbed, and it's just got big metal or even wooden wheels, and it's pretty plain. She sits on the front seat. At the bottom, I just thought that was interesting. Taya seemed to be taking very little through the wood with her. The personality of which she was so tired seemed to be letting go of her. So she's leaving behind the oppression as she's working her way forward into this new path. At the top of page 272, the old fretted lines which marked one off, which defined her, made her Thea Kronberg, Bauer's accompanist, a soprano with a faulty middle voice, were all erased. So far she had failed. Her 2 years in Chicago had not resulted in anything. She had failed with Harsanyi, and she had made no great progress with her voice. She had come to believe that whatever Bowers had taught her was of secondary importance, and that in the essential things she had made no advance. Her student life closed behind her, like the forest, and she doubted whether she could go back to it even if she tried. Interesting. Probably she would teach music in little country towns all her life. Failure was not so tragic as she would have supposed. She was tired enough not to care. That seems grim, to teach piano or voice or just in country towns. It's kind of reminiscent of what her first teacher did. Go from town to town, just teaching piano. At the end of this chapter, that night when she clambered into her big German feather bed, she felt completely released from the enslaving desire to get on in the world. Darkness had once again the sweet wonder that it had in childhood. So she has left the past, and she thinks that she's let go of that ability. Well, she has to that desire to succeed because the path she was on wasn't working with Bowers. Next paragraph. Taya's life at the Ottenberg Ranch was simple and full of light, like the days themselves. I have a note about Panther Canyon. Yeah, this note says Panther Canyon was modeled on Walnut Canyon between Flagstaff and Winslow, Arizona, which she visited in 1912. I already told you all that, anyways. At the top of page 273, she has left the place of Chicago, and now has returned to space. Remember that one? Number two, there's another reference here to the ancient people had built their houses of yellow stone and mortar. Um, these are the occupants of that canyon. I already told you about that too. The canyon twisted and wound like a snake, um, as if it's living, a living creature. And towards the bottom of 273, the cliff dwellers liked wide canyons where the great cliffs caught the sun. Panther Canyon had been deserted for hundreds of years when the first Spanish missionaries came into Arizona, but the masonry of the houses was still wonderfully firm. Top of the next page. All the houses in the canyon were clean with the cleanness of sun-baked, wind-swept places, and they all smelled of the tough little cedars that twisted themselves into the very doorways. One of these rock rooms Taya took for her own. I thought that was really, really reminiscent of her little attic house, a little attic room. She's found her own place. This was her old idea, a nest in the high cliff full of sun, like the ancient people. So she's going to be learning from them. At the bottom of this page, they made a living, chattering screen behind which she took her bath every morning. That's the cottonwoods. Over on the next page at the top, at the end of that first incomplete paragraph, all her life she had been hurrying and sputtering as if she had been born behind time and been trying to catch up. Now, she reflected as she drew herself out long up behind the rugs, it was as if she was waiting for something to catch up with her. She had got to a place where she was out of the stream of meaningless activity and undirected effort. But the only way she can find this is out in this canyon. Next paragraph. Here she could lie for half a day, undistracted, holding pleasant and incomplete conceptions in her mind, like what that author was saying, almost in her hands. They were scarcely clear enough to be called ideas. They had something to do with fragrance and color and sound, but almost nothing to do with words. She's awakening. It's happening. At the end of the paragraph, it was much more like a sensation than an idea or an act of remembering. This is the art. It's the it. Next paragraph. Music had never before come to her in that sensuous form, meaning all the senses. It had always been a thing to be struggled with, had always brought anxiety and exaltation and chagrin, never content and indolence. She's just out there being receptive. And then a few lines later, and now her power to think seemed converted into a power of sustained sensation. She could become a mere receptacle for heat. There's that word, receptacle. Or become a color, like the bright lizards that darted about on the hot stones outside her door. or she could become a continuous repetition of sound like the cicadas. So she's in the process of immersion. Next chapter, again, we see her merging herself with the canyon. 2, 3 lines down, but the things which were for her she saw. She experienced them physically and remembered them as if they had once been a part of herself. The stuff that doesn't matter to her, she barely even pays it any attention. But a few lines later, there were memories of light on the sand hills, of masses of prickly pear blossoms she had found in the desert in early childhood, of the late afternoon sun pouring through the grape leaves, and the mint bed in Mrs. Kohler's garden, which she would never lose. These recollections were part of her mind and personality. Here's the contrast. In Chicago, she had got almost nothing that went into her subconscious self and took root there. But here in Panther Canyon, there were again things which seemed destined for her. This is a star paragraph. Excuse me. I'm just so excited. Down at the bottom of page 276. The only sad thing about them was their timidity. These are the swallows, and she says that they swim, which is a really interesting image, I think. If you've ever seen swallows, they almost do seem to swim. They up and down or a roundabout. The way in which they lived their lives between the echoing cliffs and never dared to rise out of the shadow of the canyon walls. As they swam past her door, Thea often felt how easy it would be to dream one's life out in some cleft in the world. And again, this concept of merging. From ancient dwellings, there came always a dignified, unobtrusive sadness, now stronger, now fainter, like the aromatic smell which the dwarf cedars gave out in the sun, but always present, a part of the air one breathed. At the top of 277. A voice out of the past, not very loud, that went on saying a few simple things to the solitude eternally. This is such a cool chapter. There they were, a timid nest-building folk, like the swallows. Those are the ancient people. Ray Kennedy's moralizing about the cliff cities. He used to say that he never felt the hardness of the human struggle or the sadness of history as he felt it among these ruins. She was remembering, like what the critic was saying. She used to be fascinated by the stories that Ray would tell her, and she took that to herself. He used to say, too, that it made one feel an obligation to do one's best. Starve. And then in the next paragraph, it seemed to Taya that a certain understanding of those old people came up to her out of the rock shelf on which she lay, that certain feelings were transmitted to her, suggestions that were simple, insistent, monotonous, like the beating of an Indian drum. I mean, you can just hear it. They were not expressible in words, but seemed rather to translate themselves into attitudes of body, into degrees of muscular tension or relaxation. The naked strength of youth, sharp as the sun shafts, the crouching timorousness of age, the sullenness of women who waited for their captors. Then we get some insight into Henry Biltmer, who is the rancher, but seems to know quite a bit about the cliff dwellers. He knows their customs and ceremonies and their religion that went back to water. At the end of this paragraph on 278, their pottery was their most direct appeal to water, the envelope and sheath of precious elements itself. We just saw that. The strongest Indian need was expressed in those graceful jars, fashioned slowly by hand, without the aid of a wheel. And down at the bottom of this page, when Taya here's this eureka moment. When Taya took her bath at the bottom of the canyon in the sunny pool behind the screen of cottonwoods, Cather's very quick to put her behind a screen. She sometimes felt as if the water must have sovereign qualities from having been the object of so much service and desire. The stream was the only living thing left of the drama that had been played out in the canyon centuries ago. In the rapid, restless heart of it, flowing swifter than the rest. There was a continuity of life that reached back into the old time. So even here, Taya can see in the pieces of the jars that some are more artistic, and that there were people who made the vessels of the Indians, and there were the stupider ones had to carry the water, and the talented ones made the beautiful pottery designs. The glittering thread of current had a kind of lightly worn, loosely knit personality, graceful and laughing. Taya's bath came to have a ceremonial gravity. The atmosphere of the canyon was ritualistic, and this is something that she is experiencing as if she is gathering these things from the ancient people. And then the last paragraph of this chapter, the stream and the broken pottery. What was any art but an effort to make a sheath, a mold in which to imprison for a moment the shining and elusive element which is life itself? Life hurrying past us and running away, too strong to stop, too sweet to lose. The Indian women had held it in their jars. In the sculpture she had seen in the Art Institute, it had been caught in a flash of arrested motion. In singing, one made a vessel of one's throat and nostrils and held it on one's breath, caught the stream in a scale of natural intervals. That is the definition of art. Um, she has remembered the things that will push her, compel her forward. So, next chapter begins with the sentence: Taya had a superstitious feeling about the pot shards, and um, and liked better to leave them in the dwellings where she found them. If she took a few bits back to her lodge and hid them under her blankets, she did it guiltily, as if she were being watched. So she can feel the living breath of the people who were before her. Some of them were beautifully decorated. Towards the bottom of 279, they had not only expressed their desire, but they had expressed it as beautifully as they could. At the top of 280, down here at the beginning, that painful thing was already stirring, the seed of sorrow and of so much delight. There's the dichotomy, because you can, and she will do this later, she will experience the profound sadness in a piece of music which will give her joy. That's a conundrum. Yes, Ray Kennedy was right. All these things made one feel that one ought to do one's best and help to fulfill some desire of the dust that slept there. And then the last sentence of the middle paragraph: these potsherds were like fetters that bound one to the long chain of human endeavor. And a few lines later, here everything was simple and definite, as things had been in childhood. Her mind was like a rag bag into which she had been frantically thrusting whatever she could grab. That rag bag reminds us of that Mr. Kohler's wood creation, putting all these little bits together to create something larger than herself. Her ideas were simplified, became sharper and clearer. She felt united and strong. And over on page 281, in the middle, right in the middle of the paragraph, of the page, she had not been singing much, but she knew that her voice was more interesting than it had ever been before. She had begun to understand that, with her, at least, voice was, first of all, vitality, a lightness in the body, and a driving power in the blood. If she had that, she could sing. When she felt so keenly alive, um, then she could sing. When she sang with Fred, and she sang and put her whole self into it. He saw it in her back, uh, bottom of the page. A persistent affirmation or denial was going on in her, like the tapping of the woodpecker in the one tall pine tree across the chasm. I think in a couple of chapters, Cather is going to describe the woodpecker as assaulting the pine tree. I think that's kind of entertaining. Less a couple of lines of the page, everything seemed suddenly to take the form of a desire for action. It was while she was in this abstracted state, it's the artistic state, waiting for the clock to strike, that Taya at last made up her mind what she was going to do in the world, and that she was going to Germany to study without further loss of time. We're thinking to ourselves, you go, girl. Only by the merest chance had she ever got to Panther Canyon. A few lines later, one's life was at the mercy of blind chance. She had better take it in her own hands and lose everything than meekly draw the plow under the rod of parental guidance. She's drawing further and further away from her family and what she had known in Moonstone. She had seen it when she was home last summer. The hostility of comfortable, self-satisfied people toward any serious effort. Yet she had clung fast to whatever was left of Moonstone in her mind. No more of that. The cliff dwellers had lengthened her past. She had older and higher obligations. This is what Ray told her. Down at the bottom of page 282, I just thought this was interesting. The Sunday before she had been one of those cloudy days, fortunately rare, when the life goes out of the country and it becomes a gray ghost, an empty, shivering uncertainty. I just thought that Heather here has made it clear that the personification language that she uses, because this canyon has become a living creature. At the bottom of this page, there's a reference to the niggerhead cactus was thrusting its crimson blooms up out of every crevice in the rocks. I forgot to get a picture of that. I had one picture and it didn't come out very well. But the so-called niggerhead cactus is this mound. It's a mound of cactuses. And then there are balls all over it with needles sticking out. And I think that's why the term niggerhead. I forgot. Maybe I'll try to remember to get a picture of it. It's hilarious. It's just, and you don't want to sit on one. I'm just going to say. So Harry Biltmore has. This is the rancher has gone out. He likes to explore the canyon, and it. Former occupants, but now he's seeing two new occupants. And it took me a bit to figure out who they were, but it's Taya and Fred. They looked like boys. Both were hatless and both wore white shirts. On the next page, she is he and she are out tossing rocks. I think what she's doing is skipping. If you've ever skipped a stone, there's a certain technique to it, and if you don't get it right, it doesn't skip or it doesn't sail. He tells her at the bottom of page 284, you go at things too hard. And she does, but that's what's going to make her different. He's going to teach her how to fence. You're light and quick, and you've got lots of drive in you. I'd like to have you come at me with foils. You look so fierce. That is not the first person who has said that she's fierce. Remember, Mrs. Nathan-Meyer says she's got that little sparkle in her eye. And he kisses her, and she is quite hostile about it. I think it surprises her. We know how she is now. She likes to think about things, and this one sneaked up on her, and so she shoves him back. And he says, "You looked as if you'd like to murder me." She's taken aback, but we kind of like this little unfolding romance. Though in the back of our heads, we remember that she has resolved to go to Germany to learn to sing. And then Biltmore observes them from afar, and he says at the top of 286, I guess that young lady can take care of herself, he chuckled. Young Fred, though, he has quite a way with them. I really like how Cather throws in these characters and then gives us insight into Taya. And that's, in fact, she can and will need to take care of herself. At the bottom of page 286, well, it's about 2/3 of the way. The voice of the stream, there it is personified, at the bottom of the gorge was hollow and threatening, much louder and deeper than it ever was by day. Another voice altogether. The sullenness of the place seemed to say that the world could get on very well without people, red or white, that under the human world there was a geological world, conducting its silent, immense operations which were indifferent to man. Um, we know that nature is often portrayed as being sympathetic to man, malevolent to man. In this case, nature is indifferent. Nature just keeps going. And that is what Taya perceived while she was in the canyon, that there's this history there that she needs to respect and take inspiration from. At the top of page 287, I just marked in the margin, note the detail of the dawn. On the previous page, it was night, and now there's detail. The swallows darted out of their rock houses as at a signal and flew upward toward the rim. Little brown birds began to chirp in the bushes along the watercourse down at the bottom of the ravine where everything was still dusky and pale. At the first golden light seemed to hang like a wave upon the rim of the canyon. The trees and bushes up there, which one scarcely noticed at noon, stood out magnified by the slanting rays. It's really beautiful descriptions. And you can see the dawn coming up over the rim, and then suddenly it rains down and lights up the entire canyon. On the top of page 288, French squinted above his smoking cup. Say they've come out there to have a cup of coffee and be together. Well, I'm never strong for getting up before the sun. The world looks unfurnished. When I first lit the fire and had a square look at you, I thought I'd got the wrong girl. Pale and grim. You were a sight. And next paragraph. I'd love you just as much if you were not turning into one of the loveliest women I'd ever seen. Ooh, he loves her. What are you going to do with all that beauty and all that talent, Miss Kronberg? And she says, I don't know what you're talking about. Then in the next paragraph, I've decided that you never do a single thing without an ulterior motive. And that's probably true. Um, Everything in her is wrought up in moving herself forward. You ride and fence and walk and climb, and I know that all the while you're getting somewhere in your mind. All these things are instruments. I too am an instrument, like the pottery, which contained the art. It's your constancy that amuses me. You must have been doing it ever since you were 2 feet high. Then at the top of page 289, she says, yes, it was like that when I was little, she said at last. I had to be close, as you call it, or go under. But I didn't know I had been like that since you came. I've had nothing to be close about. I haven't thought about anything but having a good time with you. I just drifted. She's talking about the secret within. And she's letting down her guard. We have never seen her let her guard down too much. I mean, maybe with Ray and sometimes with Dr. Archie, but so she's drifting, she says, and then Fred says, yes, you drift like a rifle ball. What a great image. So she's out like a shot. She really doesn't just drift along like a tumbleweed. Down at the last paragraph on this page. Of course they would, Fred continued blandly. Jolly fellows have no imagination. They want to be the animating force. When they are not around, they want a girl to be extinct. How interesting is that? That's the role of women at the time. I've had my time of thinking it would not bore me to be the Apollo of a homey flat. He said, that'll be all right. And then at the top of page 290, suppose Fred came out at length. Suppose I were to offer you what most of the young men I know would offer a girl they'd been sitting up at nights about: a comfortable flat in Chicago, a summer camp in the woods, musical evenings, and a family to bring up. Would it look attractive to you? I mean, he's capable of giving that to her. And she says it's perfectly hideous. So and then he says, okay, I'm not going to offer. And towards the bottom of the page 290, it's waking up every morning with this is what it feels like to be independent. It's waking up every morning with the feeling that your life is your own and your strength is your own and your talent is your own, that you're all there. There's no sag in you. She stood for a moment as if she were tortured by uncertainty, and then she turned suddenly back to him. Don't talk about these things anymore. It isn't that I want to keep anything from you. The trouble is that I've got nothing to keep, except you know as well as I that feeling. Uh-oh. Hold 1 second. So in case you wanted to know, big dog Daphne is sitting in little dog Teddy's bed, and Teddy wasn't having it. I'm not sure what he thinks he's going to do about it. Anyway, let's see. So, I have to read you. I have a quote here from The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. The story is worth reading again if you haven't already. The main character, her husband, apparently has died, and she's sad for a second, and then she says, but she saw, this is the narrator, but she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely. And she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. That is what Taya is describing right here on page 290. Um, that is what it feels like to be independent, and that going to shows and riding around in big dresses and they're like it's perfectly hideous. On 291 at the very bottom of the page. Oh no, right in the middle of the page. Oh, I like this too. Yes, and so do you evidently. I'm becoming expert at reading your meaning in your back. I'm behind you so much on these single foot trails. You don't wear stays, do you? And he tells her, don't. You know those whalebone stays that would make their waists tiny? So glad I don't have to wear them. If you go in for opera, there's a fortune in a flexible body. Most of the German singers are clumsy, even when they are all set up, when they're well set up. In other words, when they're fat. At the bottom of the page, the upward climb after they had crossed the stream was at first a breathless scramble through underbrush. Doesn't that seem a little analogous to Taya's climb? At the top of page 292, the first complete paragraph. Ottenberg laid down under a pine tree and declared that he was going to have a pipe before he went any further. Oh, why not? Let's exercise and then take a break by smoking. It's a good thing to know when to stop, Taya, he said meaningly. I'm not going to stop until I get there. This is very much the path she's taking. At the bottom of page 292. Fred recalled the brilliant figure at Mrs. Nathanmeyer's. Taya was one of those people who emerge unexpectedly larger than we are accustomed to see them. Even at this distance, one got the impression of muscular energy and audacity, a kind of brilliancy of motion, of a personality that carried across big spaces and expanded among big things. That is what she is. And then down at the bottom of this paragraph, always buying those Zorn etchings of peasant girls bathing. No sag in them either. The Zorn etchings, Zorn was Anders Zorn. He's a Swedish painter and etcher, famous for his scenes of folk life and vigorous, full-blown bathing nudes. So, no sag in them either. Must be the cold climate, he sat up. She'll begin to pitch rocks at me if I don't move. In response to another impatient gesture from the crag, he rose and began swinging slowly up the trail. I forgot to get pictures today, which is half the fun. That's show and tell. But anyway, they were full-blown chubby nudes. So at the bottom of page 293, she stood rigid on the edge of the stone shelf, straining her eyes after that strong, tawny flight. Eagles. O eagle of eagles, endeavor, achievement, desire, glorious striving of human art. From a cleft in the heart of the world, she saluted it. It had come all the way. When men lived in caves, it was there. A vanished race, but along the trails, in the stream, under the spreading cactus, there still glittered in the sun bits of their frail clay vessels, fragments of their desire. Isn't that beautiful? And nowadays, we know that eagles are endangered, but so when one is spotted, people take pictures of it. And in fact, last week, someone had a beautiful picture of an eagle, and I think it was in the Grafton area, and it made the front page of the local paper. That's how magnificent they are. So in the next chapter, where are we in time? I'm just going to keep going because I'm almost caught up. Let's see, from the day of Fred's arrival, he and Taya were unceasingly active, which is what they do to each other. They complement each other. And now they are out in the canyon. Taya had never felt this pleasant excitement about any man before, and she found herself trying very hard to please young Ottenberg. Oh, Taya, she's smitten. And there is a storm coming, and they are forced to retreat into her little cave home, and where they can experience some of the power of nature. At the bottom of, let's see, she's wrapped in the wool of a Navajo sheep. I don't know why I underlined that. Anyway, at the bottom of 296. You've got me going pretty hard, I suppose you know, says Fred. I've had a lot of sweethearts, but I've never been so much engrossed before. What are you going to do about it? He heard nothing from the blankets. Are you going to play fair, or is it about my cue to cut away? He's asking her, so where's this going? I'll play fair. I don't see why you want to go. What do you want me for? To play with? That's an interesting question. I want you for everything. I don't know whether I'm what people call in love with you or not. In Moonstone, I think this is kind of telling. In Moonstone, that meant sitting in a hammock with somebody. I don't want to sit in a hammock with you, but I want to do almost everything else. Oh, hundreds of things. And over on page 298, she takes the initiative and we learn for the first time she kissed him without constraint or embarrassment. So this little romance is in fact developing. Next paragraph. In that moment, when he came close to her actual personality, he felt in her the same expansion that he had noticed at Mrs. Nathanmeyer's. Expansion into her back. It takes over herself. She became freer and stronger under impulses. When she rose to meet him like that, he felt her flash into everything that she had ever suggested to him, as if she filled out her own shadow. But the path was older than the white man's Arizona. I'm not sure where I wanted to do with that one. Let's see, down at the bottom of page 299, they were delighted with each other and with the adventure which lay behind them. I can't even see the whites of your eyes, Tab, but I know who was here stepping out with me anywhere. Part coyote you are, by the feel of you. When you make up your mind to jump, you jump. And I think that's fortuitous, because she is going to have to jump. At the top of page 300. I feel sure of you when I can't see you. Will you run away with me? And Taya laughed. I won't run far tonight. I'll think about it. Look, Fred, there's somebody coming. So they've left the shelter of their rock home and they're walking back to the ranch. So again, a little transport from place to space. On the first day of September, Fred Ottenberg and Taya Kronberg left Flagstaff by eastbound express. As the bright morning advanced, they sat alone under the rear platform of the observation car, watching the yellow miles unfold and disappear. So rather suddenly, we get the notion that Taya has gone off with him. I wasn't sure, so I had the trunks checked to Albuquerque. He wasn't absolutely sure she was actually going to go with him. We are exceptionally free. Nobody waiting for us anywhere. And he makes a reference to what happens to famous people in really quite the same echo that we have seen about Taya's Moonstone family, concern about people talking. He says, that's why, my dear, when your visiting card is on every beer bottle, you can't do things quietly. Things get into the paper. And then at the top of the next page 302, you have your own future in the back of your mind all the time, Fred began, and I have it in mine. I'm not going to try to carry you off as I might another girl. If you wanted to quit me, I couldn't hold you, no matter how many times you had married me. And at the bottom of page 302, if I went off with you like this, it wouldn't be to amuse myself. Ottenberg's eyes fell. His lips worked nervously for a moment. Do you mean that you really care for me, Thea Kronberg? He asked unsteadily. And she says, I guess so. It's like anything else. It takes hold of you, and you've got to go through with it, even if you're afraid. I was afraid to leave Moonstone and afraid to leave Harsani, but I had to go through with it. Again, perhaps foreshadowing. Next paragraph. Yes, more than I've ever been, but I don't think I could go back. The past closes up behind one somehow. One would rather have a new kind of misery. The old kind seems like death or unconsciousness. You can't force your life back into into that mold again. No one can go back. She does not want to go back to Moonstone or even to Chicago and be an accompanist. Um, Over on the next page, the very top of page 304, in any case, I shall help her more than I shall hurt her. This is his justification because we're about to get the bombshell. There's nothing else I care about so much as seeing her have her chance. This is the way he's thinking. She hasn't touched her real force yet. She isn't even aware of it. Lord, don't I know something about them? There isn't one of them that has such depth to draw from. She'll be one of the great artists of our time. So he thinks, in his head at least, that he is going to help her on her way. And the bombshell drops. The only trouble was that he was married already and had been since he was 20. What? Oh my gosh. And then page 304 and 305 is a description of what actually transpired. Mrs. Fred Ottenberg. That's just terrible. And turns out she was engaged to somebody else. I think you could probably surmise that she jumped from one fiance to Fred because he was more appealing. Miss Beers seemed whimsical and picturesque. She darted about in magnificent furs and pumps and close clinging gowns. And then at the bottom of page 305, she was scornful of everything. Doesn't seem like a nice girl. Which became her eyebrows. Her face was mobile and discontented, her eyes quick and black. There was a sort of smoldering fire about her, young Ottenberg thought. She entertained him prodigiously. So the description of her isn't very flattering. It goes on to page 306. To his solicitous inquiries, she replied that it was enough to make you damp, to go and try on dresses, to marry a man you weren't keen about. This is this fellow Brisbane that she was engaged to. One had to marry somebody after all the machinery had been put into motion. Boy, people have gotten into that pickle before. Miss Beers at the top of page 307 was compassionless. She's proposing that they get married. They should go anywhere, someplace where the laws weren't too fussy. Fred had not even thought about the laws. It would be all right with her father. He knew Fred's family, but it would not be all right with Fred's family. So they crossed several states before they found a justice obliging enough to marry two persons whose names automatically instigated inquiry. So He was the beloved son. That's what uh, Gel Liebter soon. I think that's how you say it. But that's the beloved son of the family. And it at the top of page 308, at the end of the year, he was mutely appealing to his mother for sympathy. At the end of the two, he was drinking in open rebellion. He had learned to detest his wife. Her wastefulness and cruelty revolted him. The ignorance and fatuous conceit which lay behind her grimacing mask of slang and ridicule humiliated him so deeply that he became absolutely reckless. And then, to my absolute delight, few lines below, as her personal mannerisms grew more and more odious to him. That's my favorite word, odious. He began to dull his perceptions with champagne. I always find the word odious. So Mrs. Otto Ottenberg, the mother of Fred, goes to try and make some sense of this. It was to public opinion, however, and not to his mother's activities that Fred owed his partial escape from bondage. They shipped her off, found her a mansion. They found her ignorant and ill-bred, insufferably impertinent. Um, I'm thinking that she was the child of someone who uh, like a beer baron, but newly so. If she's if she's ill-bred and rich, I'm thinking that's who she is. At the top of page 309, her defeat was so conspicuous, her life became such a desert, that she at last consented to accept the house in Santa Barbara, which Mrs. Otto Ottenberg had long owned and cherished. This villa was the price of Fred's furlough. So Mrs. Fred is still alive. She's living in California. Next paragraph. A divorce was the one thing Edith would never give him. She told him so, and she told his family so, and her father stood behind her. Because remember, divorce was not acceptable. She would enter no arrangement that might eventually lead to divorce. She had insulted her husband before guests and servants, had scratched his face, thrown hand mirrors and hairbrushes and nail scissors at him often enough, but she knew that Fred was hardly the fellow who would go into court and offer this sort of thing as evidence. In her behavior with other men, she was discreet. So Fred could have cited these things as the grounds for divorce, but he doesn't. So, girls who seemed to find the young brewer attractive so far, he had behaved well and had kept out of entanglements. But now he's got an entanglement. Fred had been abroad several times and had fallen more and more into the way of going about young artists, people with whom personal relations were incidental. Um, a young man might have pleasant friendships without being regarded as a prospective suitor. Those are the artist's point of view. I think with that we're going to start. Oh, we could go to the end. I've really talked for a long time though. I guess we'll finish the chapter. What the heck? 310. With Thea Kronberg, he had allowed himself more liberty than he usually did in his friendships or gallantries with young artists, because she seemed to him so distinctly not the marrying kind. That's how he justified it. She impressed him as equipped to be an artist and nothing else. It's her inexperience that allows her to fall for him. At the end of this paragraph, under the least glow of excitement, as at Mrs. Nathan Meyer's, he had seen the apprehensive, frowning drudge of Bauer's studio flash into a resourceful, consciously beautiful woman. At the top of page 311, but a personality like that, unconsciously revealing itself for the first time under the exaltation of personal feeling, what could one do but watch it? He's taken with her. He had been hanging out with artists in Europe, but he meant to help her, and he could not think of another man in the world who would. The clever ones were selfish, the kindly ones were stupid. At the top of page 312, at least I understand her, he thinks to himself. I know what she needs and where she's bound, and I mean to see that she has a fighting chance. I mean, he gave her the chance to go to Panther Canyon, He gave her that ability. And then in the next paragraph, they seemed to him for the most part to lie between windowless stone walls, and their rectitude had been achieved at the expense of light and air. In their unquestioned regularity lurked every sort of human cruelty and meanness, and every kind of humiliation and suffering. He told himself fiercely, but 100 times, to keep her free. But ironically, he's not keeping her free. Next section, Fred met it with a sinking heart. Had he really hoped she would give him another answer? Oh yeah, he asks her, and she had said a few pages earlier, I'll let you know if we're going to run away together or not. And it's as I said, things have closed behind me. I can't go back. So, am I going to Mexico? He secretly figured she's not the marrying type, and so he can get off that way, foisting the responsibility onto her. He met it with a sinking heart. Had he really hoped she would give him another answer? He would have given pretty much anything, but that did no good. He could give only what he had. He wants her to leave him to free him from this. And at the bottom of the page, she was right. She was not one of those who draw back. Some people get on by avoiding dangers, others by riding through them. They stood by the railing looking back at the level sands, both feeling that the train was steaming ahead very fast. Again, analogous to what they're doing. Fred's mind was a confusion of images and ideas. Hush! The only two things were clear to him: the force of her determination, and the belief that, handicapped as he was by the missus, he could do better by her than another man would do. So with that, we're going to close, but can you beat that? I got to where we're supposed to be on March 8th. And next, we're going to move into a new chapter. That section in Panther Canyon is the centerpiece of this novel. We see her awakening, and yet she falls in love. What is going to become of that? We will find out. With that, I'm going to close. I have talked excessively, nearly 2 hours, but it was the only way I could figure that we were going to ever catch up and complete the novel. So have a good week, and I will see you again next week. Let's hope it stays nice. I think it's supposed to be 56 tomorrow. Oh, Eureka. Have a good week.